episode, I'm talking with Reverend Linda Hart about how organizations can build stronger communities both online and in person through the effective use of social media.
This is the Women Connected podcast, where we believe that women can improve their personal and professional lives through technology. If you're ready to cut through the noise and learn exactly the tools you need to create your professional brand, be recognized, and keep up in today's fast-paced world, then stay tuned.
Welcome to the Women Connected podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Goodgame, Program Director at TBW, where we believe that women can improve their personal and professional lives through technology. Don't forget to check our website for the show notes for all of our podcast episodes. Just go to tbwconnect.com. If you're enjoying this podcast series, please take a moment and rate and review the podcast on iTunes. We appreciate your support. If you want more great content from TBW, you can like our Facebook page and follow us. But even better, you can join TBW for just $52 a year and get access to members-only resources and events. Visit tbwconnect.com for more information. Today I'm speaking with the Reverend Linda Hart, a Unitarian Universalist minister based in Washington State. Her work as a pastor has taken her to communities throughout the United States and England, and with her expertise in community building and group facilitation, her work increasingly has online and technological components. Linda, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
It's good to be here.
So when I told friends and colleagues that I was interviewing a Unitarian Universalist minister for the podcast, some of them were really kind of perplexed. And I was trying to work through that and figure out, why was it that people thought it was so, kind of unique, I guess, that I was interviewing a member of the clergy on the podcast. And I kind of came to this idea that we tend to think of clergy of whatever religious tradition it is as perhaps being more philosophical and less technological or something like that. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation about how you've been using technology in your work and to create stronger connections with congregants. But I was wondering if you could just maybe talk a little bit about that idea of perception that we sometimes have about members of the clergy.
It's one of the common things that ministers, clergy people, I expect have to explain to folks quite routinely. You're right, very often the notion is that our primary job, and certainly it's a big piece of our job, is creating worship for Sunday morning, and that requires thoughtfulness and research and reading and some time of writing and pulling things together, all the elements together for worship. And in Unitarian Universalism and many other denominations as well, or other religious communities, we really prize intellectual pursuits. So my ongoing reading life is also a very important part of my work. But part of what a bigger part of what we do is we help to steer an institution, and that requires a whole raft of work that doesn't fit into that model of reflecting and reading and writing and being alone in our study. It's the work of supporting and directing committees to some degree, gathering people together to do the work of the church. There's always lots of stuff to do, keeping buildings running, greeting people on Sunday mornings. There's the institutional work of a board of trustees that ministers typically have to coach and companion as they go along, and then just quirky little things that go on. Where the congregation I serve right now is in transition. I'm an interim minister with them, and they have operated very much as a family most of their existence. They've been around since the 50s, and I'm helping them become an actual organization at this point. That's part of my work with them. And so we were talking about a problem that we're having with our office computer. And the part-time administrator who had been, we just had a transition there. Anyhow, the new administrator was having trouble with the computer, and I said, just call someone. Just call the Geek Squad. Don't wait for a volunteer to come in and fix it. We have to operate as if this is a real thing, and we're not just doing it with a group of friends. So that's a big piece of the work that I'm doing with this particular congregation, is helping them mature and do things in a more business-like fashion. And I think that's the kind of thing that people don't realize that ministers are doing. We have to raise money every year with a congregation. It's a big part of a certain part of the year to do stewardship drives and campaigns and so on. So there's an awful lot that goes on. And then, on top of that, there's all the pastoral work, caring for people who are in distress, some small amount of counseling, and those who are dying. We take care of all of that, welcoming new babies, that sort of stuff. So it's quite diverse work. And I guess the place where it starts to intersect, or one of the places that it really intersects with the whole world of technology, is how that helps us and can help us to really weave the bonds of community in the congregation in a really interesting and kind of creative way. So that's a little thumbnail of Clergy Time.
I think that's such a really helpful kind of description of the work that you do, because I think many of us tend to engage with the clergy in our lives through a lot of that pastoral work that you're talking about, whether it's with our own families or the families of friends and others. And we don't see the kind of the guts of the operation, so to speak. And I think in a lot of ways, our vision of what your job looks like doesn't include all of the day-to-day struggles of just managing time and budgets and priorities and people that are just as much a part of your work as they are, for the head of any department or any organization.
Right.
You were starting to talk a little bit about the intersection of technology and relationships, I guess, with congregants or with members. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. I know that one of the things that is a little bit new for you is this phenomenon of connecting with your congregants more regularly outside of the church setting in virtual spaces like Facebook. And could you tell us a little bit about how you kind of found yourself doing that, and whether it's something you could ever have imagined being part of your work just even 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, I'm a interim minister at this point, and I've been with this particular congregation just under a year. My family and I returned from the United Kingdom, London, where we'd lived for 6 years, and serving a small congregation over there of people who were largely not technologically connected. During that time, I came onto Facebook, and it became a regular part of my life, and I got a Twitter account and various other kinds of online connections. But my congregation was, as I say, largely not technological. I had several members who had no computer at all, in fact, which is mind-boggling to me. But that's part of how that part of the world works, or that part of certainly that congregation worked. So when I came to the U.S., once I knew where I was going to be, almost immediately I had a friend request, and I hadn't even actually thought about how to manage members who wanted to be friends. And fortunately, the guy who asked me is a very sensible fellow, and he sent me a note saying, I understand some ministers don't do this. I won't be offended at all if you accept my request and later decide you don't want to do that. So I thought, well, I'll just go for it. I don't know how this works. I'll explore this and I'll find out. And it has been really interesting. I feel I find myself feeling very connected to the folks that I interact with on Facebook. I do find it to be a helpful sort of thing. We have a couple of pages in the congregation, and I'm active on those. I go in and I post comments, and I put up links to interesting websites that I find, or comments, or some of the memes with little spiritual sayings that I find helpful in my life. And so there's some great connectivity that I'm building there. I'm aware of a couple of things. One is that there are a vast number of people who I'm not Facebook friends with in the congregation, and I have made a decision not to seek out congregants as Facebook friends, but to accept any connection that was offered to me. And I feel that imbalance, which is interesting to me. I don't have a whole lot of judgment about it. It's just I do feel some imbalance between the people that I connect with regularly on Facebook and those who I don't. So I'm still in the midst of exploring it. I don't know when I move on from this congregation if I'll do that again. I find myself doing some censoring, not putting up some of the kinds of things that I might have 2 years ago. Just more careful about what I put out there, because my work, the people I work with are watching, and so some perhaps a little cruder sorts of things I tend to restrict myself from, even though, as I say, a couple of years ago I might have put it up. So it's been an interesting exploration with that. The other place that I've done some work, and I'm not doing it right now, is for about a year I did what I called Sermons in Seconds on Twitter, and I also had it linked to my Facebook page, where I would go and find a phrase or a line from a sermon I've written and post it online. As I say, called it my spiritual sermon in a second. Other friends called them my little spiritual bites or such things. And that was both a kind of a wonderful practice and for me, just to come to a phrase of something that was important first thing in the morning. And it seemed to be an appreciated moment in the day for those people who follow me. I, for one reason or another, I lost track of that and haven't quite gotten back to it. But that was another kind of interesting use of technology for me, was to step into that kind of a practice with Twitter.
So what I love about what you're describing here, Linda, is this idea of technology really being a way to deepen the connections with your faith community, even though there are limitations that you decide to put on it or boundaries that you've chosen to observe. And it really goes so against the idea that we often hear people talk about, that technology is isolating us and is an opportunity for us to decrease our real life connections with people or with organizations or communities that we've been part of. And it really sounds to me like a lot of the things that have become important for you in the work, technologically speaking, are actually helping you forge stronger connections. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes. Actually, I think that's, you heard me right on that we are finding ways to make greater connections. And it's actually one of the ways that church life is moving. Congregations, in my experience, largely function still as if it were the 1950s. We have committees that need to get together and have meetings. We have all sorts of, we have to maintain this physical plant. There are just lots of ways that it feels like the church has not moved forward. And I think one of the ways that I'm seeing, certainly among my colleagues and in the wider world of congregational life, is this movement toward greater use of technology rather than being having that same kind of judgment of technology is going to isolate us and we need to be in face-to-face community. the recognition that online relationships are real relationships and that we need to foster them rather than use them as a subsidiary to the real face-to-face relationships. It's one of the big pieces of change that we're seeing in congregations, the willingness to do more broadcasting, for example. The congregation I'm serving has conversations. We're still technologically a bit behind the curve, but even we're talking about how we can tape our sermons, video the Sunday services so that we can broadcast them, that we can get them out to people who can't get to the church for one reason or another. And so we can do some greater outreach into the community. There are lots of things that you can do online, virtually, that are real community, are real connections, are real relationships. We've got, as church folk, we need to be moving into that. One of the things that we need to do in this transformation of going from being only bricks and mortar is to being able to really work in the virtual world. Again, technology is doing some really interesting things for us. This is a side note. One of the things that's happening is people in other countries are discovering Unitarian Universalism, which is a pretty solidly American group of folks, or a solidly American denomination. So, but people in Africa, for example, are discovering Unitarian Universalism and starting to found Unitarian Universalist congregations there, just because of what they're able to find about this particular kind of religious organization online. And we're building some international connections that are really, really interesting to see happen. But there's also this, there's also other pieces of work that are being done. Our Unitarian Universalism, again, has a piece of our organization that's called Church of Larger Fellowship, and for years they've done mailing. They've mailed out newsletters weekly or monthly to people who are remote from Unitarian Universalist congregations, and they have embraced the online world with great vigor. In fact, there are a couple of worship services that are only online. Every week they have a little talk show that they call The View. I wish they had a different name. It's spelled EUU, where there's conversation about particular issues among a group of ministers done on Google Hangouts. And so there is some effort to really embrace this technology. You probably know, your listeners probably hear about the decline in religious participation and religious attendance that is worldwide, really, except in the first world it's worldwide. The secularization, the rise of the nuns, the people who have no religious affiliation. And if this kind of community is going to survive, it has to really transform and embrace these new technologies, because that's the way people are living these days. So there's a lot of exploration to be done, a lot of ways to reach out. And even on the local level, there's a lot that we can be doing, a lot more that we can be doing. And as I say, I'm still just learning about an awful lot of this. I have a colleague in Canada who last year did a Twitter sermon where he and a member of his congregation on a Sunday morning, the colleague had gotten his sermon done early in the week, not something a lot of us are good at, but had picked up little bits, lines or ideas from the sermon that a colleague was then, a member of the congregation, was tweeting out regularly during the service, and inviting responses. And so he did this interactive Twitter sermon on a Sunday morning where people from remote places could get an understanding of what he was talking about and respond to it. And then he brought those tweets into the service as well. It's some creative ways to try to move into this virtual world in a more effective way that reaches out and offers people some of what we do as a religious community. Yeah, lots of directions to take, lots of ways to be interactive in the world, not just broadcasting, but also interactive.
So that really seems to bring to mind, at least for me, this idea of bringing the message, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I don't necessarily mean that in the religious sense, but in the sense of information, bringing the message to people where they are. And where they are may not be in the church on Sunday morning. As you're saying, there are people who are in, countries where your denomination, Unitarian Universalism, hasn't existed before, and who are now starting to make connections with this denomination. And there isn't necessarily somebody right there in their community who can be a resource. And things like this Twitter sermon kind of reminds me of like live tweeting a conference, in a secular sense, are ways of bringing that community to people who aren't able to be in the same place together at the same time. And it's just seems like such a kind of brilliant way of using the technology to bring people together on a particular time or a particular place, even though they are very geographically distributed.
Yeah, and for folks who don't have the capacity to be present for one reason or another,
right?
People who sick on a Sunday morning, or who are simply not able or disabled in some way that does not allow them to be there as a full-body present participant, can still benefit from the feelings of community. The Church of the Larger Fellowship community not only does worship, but they do joys and sorrows, sharing of joys and sorrows. So a member of that particular online worship service can share what's going on in their lives that they need some sense of companionship with, whether it is something that's very difficult, or a serious illness, or the breakup of a relationship, whatever, or the birth of a child that they want to share the joy for. There's a way of making that really very profound human connection that isn't face to face. And as I say, the growing need to recognize online virtual relationships as real relationships. If I may, Lisa, you and I know each other because we're part of a group of friends who have been almost all, our relationships have been almost all online. And it's a very close-knit, very intimate group of friendships that we have built over many years of being friends online. And it just proves to me again and again that far from being imaginary friends, as we were called by someone's husband at one point, we're really deeply connected friends, and being able to broaden that out into the greater world, I think just this is the work of building community that is an important part of religious life for me, is building that community and that connection. In those friendships, in those relationships, we grow and deepen and bring healing and light to the world. This is an amazing tool. Technology is an amazing tool to allow us.
So we're coming to the end of our time here, and I just wanted to ask if there are any other ideas, recommendations, suggestions you have for our listeners for ways of navigating technology, smartly and with a sense of balance, I think, has really kind of been the theme of a lot of what we've talked about today.
Boy, I feel like such a novice at this myself. To think of what kind of insights or advice I might give. I still feel very much like I'm in the discovery phase for myself with this, learning how to use it. I suppose as with other parts of my life, what I strive to do is with my presence online is to be connected in a way that is that helps me be hopeful about the world, that supports what I love the most and what I want to embody the most. So finding ways to just expand kindness and compassion, to be in joyful connection with people. When one hates to think that a video that makes you just really roar with laughter is a gift to the world, but there's so many things that can dampen our spirits. The capacity to share joy with each other, however it comes, is worth paying attention to, as well as those bits and bobs, those pieces that allow us to see deeper into our own hearts, and to support us in living, as I say, living as well as we can. Threading through what there is online that enables and supports that. I suppose that's as good a guiding star as one could have in the virtual world. So yeah, I think that'll be my best advice I can give.
Thanks, Linda. It's great advice, and I really appreciate your time talking with me today. It's been really wonderful having you on the podcast.
Well, it's been great to have an opportunity to reflect and also just to hang out with you for a little while.
It has. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
The Women Connected podcast was brought to you by TBW and the TBPW Foundation, underwriter of many of our training and leadership development programs. For more information about TBW membership and our upcoming programs, please visit our website at tbwconnect.com. We hope you'll join us next time on Women Connected.